A poor girl walks into a high-end restaurant and says to a young billionaire, "Dad, you eat like a king, while my mom and I haven't eaten in days." When she says her mother's name, he freezes and starts to cry. Miles raised his champagne glass as smiles surrounded him on all sides. The Belmont restaurant was the kind of place where waiters never let your glass go empty, and where even the slightest noise was muted by soft classical music. Tonight was his night. After 3 months of negotiations, he had finally closed the deal that would put him on the map, not just as a promising executive, but as someone who had truly arrived. "To our newest director of international expansion," said Greg Dunn, the company's CEO. With that smile he reserved only for significant victories. "$1 million in commissions doesn't lie. You've just reached another level, Miles." The 5 men and 2 women around the table toasted. The clinking of crystal glasses sounded like music to Miles's ears. He had planned every step of this rise ever since leaving college. Everything was going according to plan. "Thank you for your trust," Miles responded with that calculated modesty that always worked well. "But this is only the beginning." The first course arrived, something with lobster and truffle sauce that cost more than a full day's wages for most people. Miles smiled at the impeccable presentation. This was his new world now. That was when he heard the commotion. "Miss, you can't go upstairs. This is a private area." Miles turned around to see one of the managers trying to block the staircase leading to the private room where they were. But it wasn't a woman trying to get in, it was a child. A small girl, no more than 4, with messy brown hair and eyes too big for her thin face. The girl simply ducked under the manager's arm and entered the room before anyone could stop her. Silence fell like a stone over the table. She was barefoot. Her dress, though clean, looked old and faded. She stared directly at Miles, ignoring everyone else. "Mr. Carter, my deepest apologies," the manager began, clearly horrified by the security breach. Miles raised his hand in an automatic gesture to calm things down, though he was also confused. The girl walked confidently to his chair with no hesitation. Her steps were too resolute for someone so small. Before Miles could say a word, she climbed onto the empty chair beside him, almost at his eye level. Green eyes identical to his own looked at him with an intensity that made his stomach drop. "Dad, you eat like a king, while my mom and I haven't eaten in days." The childish voice echoed through the room like thunder in broad daylight. Miles felt the blood freeze in his veins. The air around the table seemed to vanish. His colleagues exchanged looks of shock and morbid curiosity. Miles tried to speak, but his mouth was too dry. "I think you're mixing me up with someone else, kiddo." "No, I'm not," she replied, with the certainty only a child can possess. "My mum has your picture. She looks at it when she thinks I'm asleep." Miles forced a nervous smile for his colleagues. "Must be some misunderstanding. My mum's name is Rachel," the girl continued, relentless. "Rachel Moore." The name hit Miles like a slap. Rachel. 5 years ago. The girl from the college library. The relationship his mother had disapproved of so strongly. The abrupt separation. Greg cleared his throat. "Perhaps we'd better give you a moment." Miles barely registered when everyone got up, muttering vague apologies. Greg patted him on the shoulder as he left, half in sympathy, half in contained curiosity. When the door closed, leaving him alone with the girl, Miles finally allowed himself to look at her properly. Dark eyebrows like his, a stubborn chin like Rachel's, the eyes exactly like his own. "How did you find me?" he asked, nearly whispering. "I saw your picture in the newspaper. The lady at the cafe said you'd be here today." Miles crouched down so he was at her level. His hands were trembling. "What's your name?" "Ellie." "Ellie," he repeated, feeling the name strange in his mouth. "Are you hungry?" She nodded, her eyes softening just a little. Miles gestured to the waiter, who approached with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "Can you bring her some mac and cheese and an orange juice, and please?" As they waited, Miles tried asking more questions, but his mind was blank. 4 years. The math was simple. Rachel had been pregnant when they broke up. when his mother insisted the relationship was a distraction and that Rachel didn't fit his future. "How did you get here?" he finally managed. "By bus. I saved coins I found on the street," she answered, with a naturalness that tightened Miles's chest even more. The waiter brought the food, and Ellie began to eat with a strange reserve for a hungry child, as if she were trying to prove she had good manners. "My mom doesn't know I came," she said between bites. "She was working the night shift. The neighbor who takes care of me fell asleep." Miles felt a lump in his throat. "Tell me about you and your mom." Between mouthfuls, Ellie spoke. Her words were simple and direct in the way only children can be. "We don't have much to eat. Sometimes it's just stale bread and water. Mom says water fills up your tummy if you drink it slowly." Miles felt his chest tighten. "Mom works a lot. She comes home tired, but she always hugs me tight before sleeping. Sometimes she cries in the bathroom, hidden. She thinks I don't hear, but I do." Ellie took a sip of juice, her eyes never leaving Miles's. "She sings to me every night, even when she's very tired. She has a beautiful voice." Ellie smiled for the first time. "She taught me a song about stars. Want to hear?" Miles didn't trust his voice to answer. He just nodded. The song. The same song he had taught Rachel during a study night in their second year of college. His mother had sung it to him as a child. Something in Miles broke completely. The girl in front of him, his daughter, knew a song passed down through generations of his family, while she got by on stale bread and water. "Ellie," he finally managed to say, "you and your mom, do you need help?" She stopped eating and looked straight into his eyes. "My mom never asks for help. She says we're strong, but I know she needs it, 'cause sometimes she goes without eating so I can have her share." Each word felt like a stab. Miles felt the confusion and guilt welling up in his chest, crushing him from within. His perfect, planned life had just been turned upside down by a 4-year-old girl with his eyes. "Are you going to help us now?" Ellie asked, her simplicity devastating. The question hung in the air between them, an air that felt too heavy to breathe. Miles began, but couldn't find the words. "I need time to think." Ellie showed no sign of disappointment. She just gave a small nod, as if she'd expected such an answer, a gesture too grown up for someone so young. "Okay," she said simply, climbing down from the chair. "I gotta go. My mom will wake up and worry." Before Miles could react, she was already heading toward the exit. He was paralyzed, watching that little figure vanish through the restaurant door. For a moment, he considered following her, but something kept him glued to his chair. Fear, perhaps, or the sudden realization that he wasn't prepared for what came next. The taxi door shut with a slam that seemed to echo inside him. City lights blurred through the window as Miles loosened the tie that felt like it was choking him. Rachel. 5 years. A lifetime. He closed his eyes, and the memories came without warning. Rachel in the college library, brown hair in a messy bun, glasses slipping down her nose while she read. The way she looked up when he accidentally knocked over a stack of books, that smile, not mocking but genuinely amused. Miles had never seen a smile like that. "Are you trying to get my attention?" she joked, helping him gather the books. It was the start of something that, at the time, seemed so simple and so right. Late night studying together, dreams shared, laughter over cheap coffee. Rachel wanted to be a teacher. "I want to make a difference," she said, "even if it's one child at a time." Ironically, now she was making a difference for one child, their child alone. The taxi stopped at a red light. Miles saw his reflection in the window and barely recognized himself. Who was that man in the expensive suit with haunted eyes? The breakup had been abrupt, calculated. His mother, Margaret, orchestrating every move with surgical precision. "Think about your future, Miles," she insisted that night. "That girl will never fit into the world we're building for you. She'll drag you down." At the time, he was vulnerable, pressured by internships, final exams, job interviews. Margaret seized exactly the right moment to sow doubt. If she really cared about you, she wouldn't stand in your way now, at the most crucial point of your career. As always, his mother turned love into an obstacle, and he, weak and ambitious, yielded. The last time he saw Rachel was at the cafe where they used to study. He repeated the phrases his mother had crafted: "We need to go our separate ways. We have incompatible priorities. Better to end now before we get in deeper." Cold, calculated words, words that weren't his but which he delivered as if they were. Rachel didn't scream or beg. She just looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his eyes. Then she said quietly, "You're giving up something real for something that only exists in your head, Miles." She stood, threw her bag over her shoulder, and offered one last phrase before leaving. "I hope you find what you're looking for someday. And I hope you know it when you see it." After that, nothing. Rachel transferred to another university. He heard rumors, but never checked. He threw himself into studies, internships, interviews. He meticulously built the life his mother planned for him. A life of success measured in zeros in the bank and names on business cards. And now, that perfect, empty life had been flipped upside down by a 4-year-old girl with his own eyes. "We're here, sir," said the driver, interrupting his thoughts. Miles paid the fare and went into his upscale apartment building. The doorman greeted him, but he barely noticed. In the mirrored elevator, he saw his reflection under merciless lights. 32 years old. Successful. Alone. In his penthouse, he threw his jacket onto the Italian leather sofa and poured himself a pricey whiskey. The silence was oppressive. It always had been, though he'd never realized. Why now? Why? After 4 years, would Rachel send Ellie to him? The girl's words echoed: hunger, hidden tears, stale bread, a mother sacrificing her own food. Though suspicion grew within him. Had Rachel tried contacting him before? His mother had always filtered his communications after college. "To avoid distractions," she said. But what if... Miles put down his whiskey and went to his office. He turned on the computer and typed Rachel Moore into a search. Nothing relevant. He tried social media. No active profiles. It was as if she'd disappeared, or as if someone had made sure he could never find her. He picked up the phone and dialed his mother's number, but hung up before it rang. No, he needed a clear head. If Margaret really did hide this from him, she'd never admit it under direct confrontation. Miles went back to the living room and stared out the panoramic window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Rachel and Ellie, his daughter, were maybe going to bed hungry. The thought was unbearable. Tomorrow, he'd go back to the restaurant, ask if any staff saw which way the girl went. He'd check hospitals, schools, social services, any place with records. He would find Rachel and his daughter at any cost. Because, for the first time in years, something more important than contracts and profit demanded his attention, demanded answers to questions he'd never dared ask. Why the silence? Why the distance? And the most painful question, why had Rachel never told him about Ellie? Unless she had tried. Miles barely slept. The first hint of morning light found him already dressed, staring at the city from his apartment. The image of Ellie leaving the restaurant by herself haunted him all night. A 4-year-old child, alone on the street. His daughter. It still felt unreal, like a confused dream he couldn't wake from. By 7 o'clock, he was back at the Belmont. The restaurant was still closed, only cleaning staff inside. A different manager than the previous night opened the door, looking puzzled. "I'm sorry, sir, we're not open yet." "I'm not here to eat," Miles said quickly, more urgently than intended. "I'm looking for a little girl who was here last night. Brown hair, green eyes, about 4 years old. She's my daughter." That last part came out awkwardly, as if he were testing the words. The manager frowned, thinking, "Oh, the child who ran into the VIP area. I heard about that, but wasn't on duty. Let me call someone who was." Minutes later, a middle-aged hostess arrived, still wearing a coat over her uniform. "Yes, I remember that girl," she said. "She ran out right after you went back to the table. I thought you two just missed each other." "Did you see where she went?" The woman vaguely pointed right down the main street. But after that, I really can't say. Miles thanked her and left. The main street was starting to bustle, shops opening, people heading to work. He walked slowly, scanning every alley, every corner. He stopped at a bakery. "Did you see a small girl here last night? Brown hair, 4 years old?" The baker shook his head. "I don't work nights, sir." A newsstand, a bus stop, a pharmacy. No one had seen Ellie. With every negative answer, the weight in his chest grew heavier. How had such a small child gotten home alone? His worry turned to fear. After 2 hours searching the area, Miles paused in front of a small cafe. An older woman served coffee behind the counter. "Excuse me," he began, almost hopeless. "I'm looking for a little girl, 4 years old, who was at the Belmont last night." The woman stopped, looking curious. "Does she have big green eyes? Talks older than she looks?" Miles's heart pounded. "Yes, did you see her?" "She comes around occasionally. She's sharp as a whip." The woman smiled. "Sometimes I give her a piece of bread to take home." "Do you know where she lives?" "Somewhere near the end of Oak Street, I think." Where they were going to tear down those old houses. Miles thanked her and left quickly. Oak Street was a 20-minute walk, deeper into a part of town he usually avoided. The contrast was obvious with each block: shabbier buildings, cracked sidewalks, fewer upscale shops, more convenience stores and pawn shops. By the time he reached Oak Street, the surroundings were nothing like the area around the Belmont. Old houses, many abandoned, some squatted. Miles walked slowly, ignoring the suspicious glances of the few passers-by. Then he saw her, sitting on the sidewalk in front of a brick building, holding a worn brown teddy bear so old its original shape was barely recognizable. One arm dangled by a thread. Ellie was playing alone, humming softly to the bear. She looked so small and vulnerable that Miles felt a surge of protectiveness he'd never experienced. "Ellie," he called gently. She looked up. For a moment, she seemed startled, but then her face broke into a timid smile. There was no reproach in her gaze, no judgment for how he'd let her leave the night before. Just that simple, direct acceptance children have. "You came," she said, as if she always knew he would. Miles knelt, so he was at her level. "Are you okay? How did you get home last night?" "I took the bus." "I know the route," she said proudly, which for a 4-year-old child it truly was. Miles swallowed, imagining her alone on a bus at night. "I came to talk to your mom. Can you take me to her?" Ellie thought for a moment, then stood up with her teddy bear still in her arms. "Mom's at work until noon. But we can wait inside." She held out her tiny hand and Miles took it, feeling how fragile she was. Ellie led him down a broken sidewalk, then through an alley, then another. With every turn, it felt like they were venturing deeper into a part of the city time had forgotten. They finally stopped in front of what looked like a ruin: exposed brick, broken windows covered with plastic and cardboard, a makeshift wooden board as a door, hinged with rusty metal. "You live here?" Miles asked, unable to hide the shock in his voice. Ellie nodded as though it was perfectly normal. "Come on, I'll show you my drawings." Inside was even more desolate. A single large room, with what might have once been a fireplace on one wall. On the floor, an old mattress with clean but threadbare sheets. A small table with 2 mismatched chairs. In a corner, a neat pile of folded clothes. Cardboard boxes served as improvised cupboards. What struck Miles the most was how clean it was. Despite the glaring poverty, the space was impeccably organized. The few personal items, a hairbrush, some tattered books, a small radio, were carefully placed. "These are my drawings," Ellie said, pointing to sheets of paper taped to the wall. Childlike pictures showing 3 people holding hands, a woman, a girl, and a man marked with a question mark for a face. Miles felt a knot in his throat. "They're very nice," he managed to say. "That's the dad I imagined," she explained, pointing to the faceless figure. "But now I know what you look like. I'll draw a new one later." Ellie pulled out a box from under the table. "My, taking out some colored pencils, most worn down to tiny stubs. "Wanna draw with me while we wait for Mom?" she asked. Miles nodded, unable to speak. He sat on the floor next to her, holding a stubby red pencil. He'd never imagined something so simple could be so difficult. They drew for almost an hour. Miles sketched a house with a garden, nothing like the reality around them. Ellie drew her mom with an oversized smile. The time passed in surprisingly comfortable silence. Then they heard footsteps outside. The door opened, and Rachel entered. 5 years had passed, but Miles would have recognized her anywhere. The same brown hair, now shorter. The same delicate face, though thinner and etched with fatigue. She wore a simple diner uniform, a name tag that read Rachel. When her eyes met Miles, she froze. The bag she was carrying, likely containing her lunch, fell to the floor. "Mom!" Ellie ran to her. "Look who's here." Rachel said nothing. Her eyes locked on Miles with no trace of joy or relief, only shock and, he realized with a heavy heart, distrust. "What are you doing here?" she finally asked, her voice rougher than he remembered. Miles rose slowly. "Ellie found me last night, at the restaurant." Rachel looked at the child, who gave a sweet smile. "You went downtown alone." "Ellie, I told you." "Don't be mad at me, Mom. I just wanted to show you my dad." Rachel took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "Go play outside for a bit, honey. I need to talk to Mr. Carter." Ellie glanced between them, sensing the tension, but obeyed. When the door shut, leaving them alone, the silence was dense enough to cut with a knife. "You shouldn't have come here," Rachel said at last. "You live like this?" Miles asked, unable to suppress the question. A bitter smile crossed Rachel's face. "Shocking. Not all of us have a wealthy mother to fix our problems." The mention of his mother brought back all the doubts that had haunted him overnight. "Rachel, I didn't know about Ellie." "Of course not," she replied, bending to pick up the items that spilled from her bag. "How could you, when you were so busy building your empire?" The bitterness in her voice struck like a physical blow. "Did you try to tell me?" Rachel paused, looking straight at him. "I tried, Miles, for months. I called your house. I sent letters, emails. I even went to your campus once." "I never got any of that," he said, feeling hollow. "Your mother," Rachel said simply. "The last time I tried, she answered the phone. She said you wanted nothing to do with me, that you'd moved on, and I should stop being pathetic." Miles closed his eyes, the full force of Margaret's betrayal hitting him. "I never knew." "Does it matter now?" Rachel asked, exhaustion in her voice. She placed the bag on the table. "What do you want, Miles? Why did you come here?" "I want to help you," he said, taking a step closer. "No one should live like this, Rachel, especially not Ellie." She raised a hand to stop him. "We don't need your charity. We've gotten by until now." "This isn't living, Rachel. Ellie deserves better. You deserve better. Now you care." "After 5 years," she let out a humorless laugh. "Convenient." Miles inhaled deeply, fighting to keep calm. Then, summoning courage, he asked the question that had echoed since last night. "Rachel, Ellie, is she really my daughter?" The silence was suffocating. Rachel stared at him, her eyes full of pain and pride accumulated over years. She answered quietly but decisively, "I'm not sure you deserve to know the truth after everything." It felt like a punch to the gut. Miles suddenly felt out of place, an intruder in this hovel that nonetheless held more honesty and dignity than his entire life of hollow luxury. Through the broken window, he saw Ellie playing outside, still clutching her ragged teddy bear. Something about her seemed familiar, but was it real or just his mind searching for connections? "You disappear for 5 years and expect me to just answer your questions," Rachel challenged, folding her arms. "Some truths have to be earned, Miles." Miles realized then that his carefully built life was a fragile structure of appearances and conventions. In contrast, this ruined house, starkly poor, held something his penthouse never had: truth. "I'm not here to claim rights," he said softly. I'm here to accept responsibility, if you'll let me. Rachel didn't respond. The silence weighed heavily, more than words could. Margaret Carter's house was in the city's best neighborhood, surrounded by manicured gardens and enclosed by a tall wall that sealed off the outside world. Miles looked at the imposing facade where he'd grown up, feeling like a stranger. The same place that once spelled safety now felt like a fortress built on lies. He hadn't called ahead. He didn't want his mother to prepare excuses or rehearsed explanations. He wanted the raw truth for the first time in his life. The housekeeper opened the door, surprised to see him. "Mr. Miles, we didn't know you were coming today." "Is my mother here, Greta? She's in the greenhouse, tending her orchids." Miles walked through the house without glancing around. He knew every corner, every priceless object, every painting on the walls. A museum of facades his mother curated so carefully. The greenhouse lay out back, an elegant structure of glass and metal where Margaret kept her award-winning orchids. She was there, just as she always was on Wednesday mornings, impeccably dressed even for gardening, grey hair perfectly in place, her hands in soft leather gloves. "Miles," she said, not turning around, recognizing his footsteps. "What a surprise. I thought you'd be busy with your new contract. We need to talk," he said, his tone making her finally face him. Margaret studied her son for a moment, her sharp eyes instantly noting something was wrong. "What happened? You look upset." "I met someone yesterday, or I re-met someone." Miles watched her closely. For a split second, so brief it might have been missed, he saw a flicker in her eyes. Worry, fear, guilt. "Who?" she asked, turning her attention back to an orchid she pruned. "Rachel Moore." Margaret's hands hesitated momentarily, then resumed their precise movements. "That girl from college. I thought you were over that phase." "It wasn't random," Miles continued, ignoring the dig. "A little girl came looking for me. Her name is Ellie. She's 4. Margaret placed her pruning shears on the table and removed her gloves, her movements deliberately slow. "And I assume this girl says she's your daughter." The coldness in her voice made Miles furious. "Rachel said she tried to reach me when she found out she was pregnant. She called the house, sent letters, emails. She even came to the campus. I never knew." "Strange, isn't it?" Margaret sighed, as if the conversation were a bothersome chore. "You were at the most critical point of your career. I merely filtered distractions." "Distractions?" Miles felt his temper rise. "Are you calling my daughter a distraction? We don't even know if she truly is your daughter," Margaret retorted with forced calm, though a hint of nervousness. "That girl probably saw your success and tried to take advantage." "Rachel lives in a condemned house," Miles stated, watching her reaction. "Ellie gets by on stale bread and water. She's not after my money." Margaret fiddled with her pearl brooch, a gesture Miles recognized as a sign she felt cornered. "You've always been naive, Miles. Girls like that know exactly how to manipulate men like you." "What did you do with her letters?" The silence that followed was heavy. Margaret walked over to an especially rare orchid, a species she often said was worth more than some people's annual salary, and stroked its petals with feigned attention. "I did what any mother would do to protect her son. You destroyed them." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she finally admitted, turning to face him. There was no remorse in her gaze. "And I'd do it again." That girl had nothing to offer except trouble. Miles felt a wave of nausea. "You blocked her emails too." "I spoke with the university's IT department, surprisingly easy to set up filters. And when she came to campus," a slight smile touched Margaret's lips, "I told her you'd moved on, that you were dating the Goldman girl. I even showed her photos of you two at the charity ball." She shrugged. "Technically, it wasn't a lie. You did take Victoria to that ball." Miles felt his legs weaken. He sat on a nearby bench, unable to stay on his feet. "You lied to me for 5 years," he whispered, almost voiceless. You stole from me the chance to know my daughter from the start. We don't even know if she's... Enough! Miles raised his voice for the first time. She has my eyes, Mother, my chin, even the way she tilts her head when she's focused. Margaret remained silent for a moment, her mask of composure finally showing cracks. I did what I thought was best for you, she said at last. You had such a brilliant future. A pregnant girl would have ruined everything. It wasn't your choice to make. Of course it was. I'm your mother. I built every rung of the ladder you climbed. Her voice now betrayed emotion, not regret but outrage at having her authority questioned. Look at you now, an executive, respected, wealthy. This is the life I planned for you. Miles looked around at the greenhouse, at the expensive orchids artificially maintained in a controlled environment, just as his mother had tried to do with his life. What if I don't want this life anymore? The question hung like a challenge. Margaret frowned, as if she couldn't understand. What are you talking about? Of course you do. We spent years building this. You did, he corrected her. I just followed the path you laid out. Without questioning, Miles stood up, suddenly exhausted by the lies, the manipulation, this meticulously planned life. Exhausted by being his mother's orchid on display. Ellie went hungry, Mother, actually hungry, while I was celebrating contracts in fancy restaurants. Margaret scoffed in annoyance. Then give them money, fix the situation and move on. You don't have to turn your life upside down over a temporary mistake. A mistake? Miles felt a surge of rage unlike anything before. We're talking about my daughter. A daughter you don't even know is yours, she countered, voice suddenly tense. Miles, be rational. You've built something remarkable. Don't throw it all away on sentimentality. He looked at his mother, really looked, and saw something he'd never noticed. A void. Behind the perfection and control was a hollowness she'd tried to fill by dictating his life, molding him into her vision of success. I don't think I'll ever forgive you for this, he said quietly, no longer shouting, but filled with a deep, searing clarity. Margaret hardened her expression. One day you'll understand I did it out of love. No, Miles replied, heading for the greenhouse door. You did it out of control, and there's a big difference. Before leaving, he stopped at the threshold and looked back one last time. I'm going to meet my daughter, Mother, with or without your approval. And for the first time, I'm going to figure out the life I actually want. As he walked away from the property, Miles felt a tremendous weight lift off his shoulders. For years, he believed his success was genuinely his. Now, he saw he'd merely inherited his mother's ambitions, her values, her narrow view of success. The real legacy, love and a connection to his daughter, had been kept hidden, overshadowed by the fortress of expectations Margaret had erected around him. Now it was time to discover what truly mattered, even if it meant tearing everything down and starting from scratch. Miles waited in his car across the street, watching the modest diner where Rachel worked. After confronting his mother, he'd spent a lot of time thinking about what to do. Rachel had made it clear she didn't want his help, but that didn't mean he could just vanish from Ellie's life. Not again. PM. According to what he'd heard Rachel tell Ellie before leaving for work, the neighbor would pick Ellie up from preschool at 4. That left maybe 15 minutes, if that. He quickly drove to the small public school a few blocks away. The building was simple, with a modest playground enclosed by a low fence. He parked and waited, feeling as nervous as a teenager on his first date. The children started leaving after 4, some meeting parents at the gate, others lining up for school buses. Miles looked for Ellie until he spotted her sitting alone on a bench, hugging a tattered backpack with star drawings. He took a deep breath and got out of the car. Approaching slowly, he was aware he might look suspicious. A teacher noticed him immediately. "May I help you?" she asked, placing herself protectively between him and the kids. "I'm here to pick up Ellie Moore. He hesitated. I'm her father. The teacher frowned. No father is listed in her file. Just the mother and a neighbor. Miles felt a pang realizing he officially didn't exist in his daughter's life. It's complicated, he tried. I've been away, but I can prove who I am. Before the conversation could go further, Ellie looked his way. Recognition lit her eyes instantly, freezing Miles on the spot. It's him! It's my dad, she exclaimed, running up to him with a joy so pure it hurt. The teacher looked from Ellie to Miles, suspicion still apparent, but softened by the girl's spontaneous reaction. Miss Weber, he really is my dad, Ellie insisted, grabbing Miles's hand like it was the most natural thing. He came to see me. Ellie, your mum didn't say anything about this, the teacher said gently. It's a surprise, Miles cut in, trying to sound calm. I meant to talk to Rachel first, but... He trailed off, realizing he was only making it worse. Ellie glanced from him to the teacher with a serious look too old for her years. It's all right, Ms. Weber. My mom said my dad could visit me whenever. She just didn't know it'd be today. Miles blinked, surprised by the tiny fib. The teacher still looked wary, but Ellie was already tugging on his hand, determined. Can we get some ice cream? Asked the girl. Ellie, as the teacher began. I'll have her back in an hour, Miles promised. You can call me if you want. He offered his card, which the teacher took reluctantly. I'll call your mum, Ellie, she warned. She's at the diner, Ellie replied instantly. She doesn't finish until 7. Miles realized how well the girl knew her mother's schedule, probably a survival necessity. The teacher checked her watch, then eyed the card, and finally nodded. 1 hour, Mr. Carter, and I will confirm this with Rachel as soon as possible. Miles thanked her, letting Ellie guide him to the car. Your car is huge, she remarked, examining the luxury sedan. It's just a car, he said, suddenly self-conscious. He opened the door. We should get you a car seat, though. It's not safe like this. We always ride the bus, Ellie replied with a shrug, or walk. Miles made a mental note to buy a booster seat soon. For now, he adjusted the seatbelt as best as he could and drove slowly to a nearby ice cream shop. As they walked from the sidewalk to the store, Miles felt something in his coat pocket. A small teddy bear he'd bought earlier, almost forgotten. He stopped and knelt to her height. I got something for you, he said, handing over the toy. Ellie's eyes widened. The bear was simple, light brown with a red bow, not fancy by store standards, but to her it seemed the greatest treasure. Is it really mine? She asked, handling it reverently. All yours, Miles assured, feeling his throat tighten. Ellie hugged the bear tightly, eyes closed in pure joy, so intense it broke and mended something in Miles simultaneously. Inside the shop, she chose chocolate with caramel topping. Miles watched, fascinated, as she ate with meticulous care, as though each spoonful had to last forever. How you don't get ice cream much, do you? He asked. She shook her head. Only on my birthday or when we win the lottery. The lottery? Miles was surprised. Ellie laughed. It's what Mum says when she finds money in the street or gets an extra tip. She says, we hit the jackpot today and we get something special. Miles's chest ached. Tiny joys turned into celebrations, a mother trying to soften poverty for her daughter. Do you like school? He asked, switching to a lighter subject. Yes, I'm learning to read, Ellie said proudly. I can write my name and Mum's. Want to see? Without waiting, she grabbed a napkin and, tongue poking out in concentration, wrote Ellie and Rachel in large, uneven letters. That's great, Miles praised, impressed by her determination. Hesitantly, he asked, Do you know how to write, Dad? Ellie looked at him, a shy smile on her lips. I do, but I never needed to. She took another napkin and, with even more focus, wrote DAD. Then, as if finalizing an important choice, she added MILES underneath, each letter carefully formed. Now I can write your name too, she said, handing the napkin over like a prized gift. Miles tucked the napkin in his pocket, hoping she wouldn't see the tears threatening to fall. "What do you like to do most?" he asked, watching her finish the ice cream. Ellie paused. "I like it when Mom sings to me before bed, and when she tells me stories she makes up. Stories about princesses who saved the day by themselves." She spoke about Rachel with such love and admiration that Miles felt a stab of jealousy. Rachel had built that bond on her own while he was oblivious to his daughter's existence. "And what do you like the least?" he asked, curious. Ellie made a funny face. "I don't like when it's too cold at home and we can't turn on the heat because it's expensive. And I don't like when Mom is sad." "Does she get sad often?" "Sometimes. But she thinks I don't notice." Ellie adjusted the new teddy bear's bow. "She's saddest when she has to choose." "Choose what?" "Between buying food or medicine when I'm sick, or paying the electric bill or buying school supplies," Ellie said, with a matter-of-factness that showed those choices were her normal. Miles inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of lost time and the responsibility looming before him. "Ellie," he said gently, "could I ask you something?" She nodded, licking the last of the chocolate off her spoon. "Would you mind if I'm around more? Like today?" Her green eyes, mirroring his, lit up. "Could we have ice cream again?" Miles smiled. "We can. And other things too. Whatever you want." Ellie was quiet, thinking. Then, with that surprising seriousness that sometimes came over her, she asked, "Are you going to disappear again?" The question hit him like a punch in the gut. There was no accusation, just genuine curiosity and a hint of fear. The question of a child who'd already learned that people can leave. "No," Miles answered, voice trembling. "I won't disappear. I promise." Ellie nodded, satisfied. "Mum says promises are serious. Only promise what you can do." "She's right, and I promise, Ellie. I'll be here from now on." She smiled and, unexpectedly, stretched across the table to gently touch his face, as if confirming he was real. "You have the same eyes as me," she said simply. On the ride back to school, Ellie talked non-stop about her friends, her drawings, the stray cat that sometimes came to their broken window. Miles listened, enthralled by his daughter's lively imagination and the way she transformed hardship into small adventures. When they arrived, the teacher was at the gate, visibly relieved. Next to her stood an older woman, presumably the neighbor who was supposed to pick Ellie up. "Mr. Carter," the teacher called. "Rachel explained the situation over the phone. She asked me to tell you that if you want to see Ellie again, you need to arrange it directly with her first." Miles nodded. "Thank you. I will." The neighbor, a tired but kind-looking woman, beckoned to Ellie. "Come on, dear. Your mum's working late tonight." Ellie turned to Miles, hesitant. He crouched down. "I'll see you soon, promise." She nodded solemnly, then gave him a quick hug before running off, clutching the new teddy bear in her arms. Miles watched them go, heart torn between the joy of their meeting and the emptiness he felt once the child had gone. "Mr. Carter," the teacher added, "Rachel said you two have things to sort out, but she told me to remind you that if you want to see Ellie again, you need to talk to her first." Miles nodded. "Yes, I'll do that." In the days that followed, Miles felt split between two worlds. At work, he was still the successful executive, attending meetings, making decisions, keeping up appearances, but his thoughts were always on Ellie and Rachel. "Miles, are you listening?" Greg asked in a major board meeting. "Sorry, got distracted." Miles tried to refocus on the charts on the screen. His partners exchanged glances. It was unlike Miles Carter to lose concentration in a discussion. He was known for unwavering focus. "Are you okay?" asked Sarah after the meeting. "You seem distant." "I'm just tired," he lied. How to explain that he had discovered a daughter, and that the life he had devoted himself to now felt empty in comparison to Ellie's smile? At home, his mother's calls were relentless, her voice growing more annoyed each time. "Miles, you can't just throw everything away because of this situation," Margaret insisted on the phone, studiously avoiding Ellie's name. "Be rational." "I am thinking, Mother. For the first time in a while, he obtained Rachel's number from the school, claiming he needed to discuss custody, something he hadn't fully worked out but served as a pretext. When he finally mustered the courage to call Rachel answered on the third ring, her tone guarded. "What do you want, Miles?" "To see Ellie again," he said simply. "Regularly." A long silence ensued. "I don't want your pity," Rachel said finally, "or your money out of obligation." "This isn't pity or duty," Miles insisted. "It's my right and hers." "Right?" She let out a shaky laugh. "Where was that right when she was born?" "When she got sick at 2AC and I worked 3 jobs to pay for the hospital." Miles closed his eyes, guilt crushing him. "Rachel, I'm truly sorry. You know I had no idea. And now that you do, what's changed? You want to play dad on weekends, buy a few gifts and go back to your perfect life." The accusation stung because Miles sensed some truth in it. He was clueless about real fatherhood or how to balance it with his job. "I'm not sure how this works," he admitted, "but I want to try. For Ellie. She deserves a father." Another long silence. When Rachel spoke, her voice was gentler, almost resigned. "Saturday from 10 to noon, you can pick her up at our place. But, Miles," she paused, "don't promise anything you can't keep. She's had enough disappointments." Miles felt the weight of those words as he hung up. He was stepping into unknown territory without a map. All he had was the certainty in Ellie's gaze, eyes so much like his own, and a growing conviction that, for the first time, he was doing something that truly mattered. Even if it meant rethinking everything he thought he knew about himself and his carefully crafted world. Miles parked a block away from Rachel's place. After 3 weeks of seeing Ellie regularly, this was his first full Saturday, an entire day instead of a couple of hours. He'd promised to take her to the zoo, something Ellie brought up with such excitement it sounded like the biggest adventure in the world. As he waited for the appointed time, his mind drifted back to the past. Lately, memories of Rachel surfaced more often, fragments of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. 7 years ago. "You're doing it wrong," Rachel said, leaning over the calculus book Miles was tackling in the library. "That derivative doesn't work that way in this case." He glanced up, annoyed by the interruption, but her confident, unthreatening smile disarmed him immediately. She wore her hair in a loose ponytail, glasses slipping down her nose, and a faded t-shirt from a band he didn't recognize. "Sorry," she went on. "I didn't mean to interfere. I just saw you struggling for 15 minutes and thought you might want help." "You know advanced calculus?" Miles asked, failing to hide his surprise. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "I'm on a full math scholarship, so yes, absolutely." She pulled up a chair and sat beside him, explaining the problem with a clarity no professor had matched. Miles noticed her hands as she wrote, long fingers moving deftly, her thumbnail slightly chewed. "See? It's not so bad once you get the hang of it." Miles looked at the solution, then at her, feeling something shift inside him. "Can I buy you a coffee as a thanks?" he heard himself ask. Rachel smiled, eyes bright with amusement or curiosity. "Maybe both. Only if it's the off-campus cafe. The coffee here is dreadful." And so it began. 6 months later. "I can't believe you've never been here," Rachel said, leading Miles through the bustling farmers market downtown. It was alive with colors on a Saturday morning, stands full of fruit, vegetables, artisanal breads, and cheese. Miles, used to the priciest supermarkets his mother frequented, felt simultaneously out of place and fascinated. "My family doesn't shop like this," he said, dodging an older lady looking at tomatoes. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Of course not. You probably have someone doing your shopping and cooking while you just show up for dinner." She was right, but there was no real judgment in her voice, just acknowledging a difference they were trying to navigate. "Come on, I want you to see something." Rachel took him to a stall at the far end, where an elderly man sold used books. "Mr. Patrick, this is Miles, the one I mentioned." The old man smiled, revealing crooked but kindly teeth. "Ah, the rich boy who's never read Vonnegut?" Miles blushed. but Rachel squeezed his hand. "I set something aside for you, Mr. Patrick said, handing Miles a worn copy of The Sirens of Titan. "Start with this. If you hate it, I'll never bother you again." Miles looked at the battered cover, then at Rachel, who watched with anticipation. "Thanks," he said, realizing she was sharing not just a book but a piece of her world. That afternoon, sitting on a park bench, she read aloud the first chapters, her enthusiasm infectious. Miles paid more attention to her than the text, captivated by how she embraced each moment fully, without reservations. She was so unlike everything he knew. A year later, "I can't believe you've never gone camping," Rachel said, finishing the setup of the small tent in a clearing. The summer sun was sinking, painting the sky orange. "My mother considers a 5-star hotel the bare minimum for travel," Miles replied, clumsily helping with the tent poles. Rachel laughed, a sound that always made him smile, no matter what. "Well, Mr. Carter, get ready to sleep under the stars like us mere mortals." Later, lying side by side on a sleeping bag under a sky full of stars, Miles felt a peace he'd never known. "My mum used to bring me here when I was little," Rachel said softly, "before she got sick. She taught me the constellations." "Show me," Miles asked, genuinely curious about that part of her life she rarely mentioned. Rachel pointed at the sky, tracing shapes among the stars, telling stories of gods and heroes. Then she sang a quiet lullaby about a girl who counted stars until she slept. "That's beautiful," Miles commented when she finished. "I've never heard it before. My mom made it for me. She said each star was a dream waiting to be fulfilled." Miles memorized the tune that night, asking her to repeat it multiple times. Later, he surprised her by singing it himself during a late-night study session when they were both exhausted. "How do you remember?" she asked, touched. "Some things are too important to forget," he said simply. A sound of a door opening pulled Miles from his reverie. It was time to pick up Ellie. He got out of the car and walked toward the makeshift home Rachel and her daughter now occupied. He approached quietly. The door was ajar, and instead of knocking, Miles peeked inside. Rachel was sitting on the edge of the mattress where Ellie lay, the little girl's hair spread over a worn pillow. Rachel gently ran her fingers through Ellie's hair, singing softly, the same star lullaby he'd once shared with her in college. "Mom," Ellie murmured drowsily, "sing the part about stardust again." Rachel smiled and continued the gentle tune, her voice as sweet as Miles remembered. Something broke inside him at that moment, a wall he hadn't even realized he'd built. That song, which he thought was merely a fond memory of a lost love, had become a bridge connecting past and present, Rachel, Ellie, and the life he'd had versus the one he might have led. Rachel finished, kissing Ellie's forehead. "Dad is taking me to the zoo today," Ellie mumbled, half asleep in what appeared to be a morning nap. "I know, darling. So rest a bit more before he comes." Miles backed away a few steps, then finally knocked on the door, pretending he'd just arrived. Rachel answered, and for a split second, her eyes seemed softer seeing him. Or maybe it was just the echo of the lullaby that lingered between them, a relic of love that time and hardship hadn't fully extinguished. Returning to his penthouse after visiting Ellie again, Miles couldn't sleep. The image of the place where his daughter lived haunted him, windows broken, covered in plastic, damp walls, a single space serving as bedroom, living room, and kitchen. Sitting on his Italian leather sofa, he looked around his spacious apartment and felt a deep shame he'd never known. The contrast was too painful. While he lived surrounded by unnecessary luxury, Ellie and Rachel barely had a safe roof over their heads. The girl slept on a mattress on the floor. She had no bedroom of her own, no bookshelves, though she loved stories. Not even a window that closed all the way to protect her from the cold. The next morning, during a crucial meeting about the company's expansion into Asia, Miles found himself unable to focus. The voices of the executives around the table sounded distant and irrelevant. "Miles, how about the third quarter figures?" Greg asked, cutting through his thoughts. "Sorry, could you repeat that?" Miles loosened his tie, trying to ground himself in the moment. Greg frowned, clearly irritated. "Are you okay? You're not yourself lately." "I'm fine," Miles said automatically, though he knew it was a lie. After the meeting, Sarah cornered him in the hallway. "What is going on?" she asked directly. "At first I thought you were just tired, but it's been weeks now that you seem to be in another world." Miles considered lying again, but something inside him gave way. "I found out I have a daughter." Sarah's eyes went wide. "My God, Miles, how—" "Long story. She's 4, named Ellie, and—" He hesitated, breathing in. "She and her mother live in conditions you wouldn't believe." For the first time, Miles spoke openly about the situation. Sarah listened without interruption, her face shifting from shock to empathy. "So, what are you going to do about it?" she asked at last. The question hung in the air for a few seconds. What would he do? Weekend visits and a few gifts weren't enough. "Not anymore." "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I can't leave them living like that." In the following days, Miles was even more distracted at work. He arrived late, left early, and spent hours on the phone with real estate agents. During an important video conference with Japanese investors, he caught himself drawing houses on his notepad. Simple houses with large windows and a small yard for Ellie to play in. In his apartment at night, he researched schools in that part of the city, parks and community centers, anything that could give Ellie and Rachel a safer environment without yanking them out of their world entirely. One evening, Margaret called. "Greg told me you've been missing important meetings," she said, skipping any greeting. "What's going on?" "I'm reorganizing my priorities, Mother," Miles replied matter-of-factly. "This is because of that child, isn't it?" "Miles, we talked about this. You can help them financially without compromising your career. Some things are more important than a career." Silence on the other end spoke volumes. For Margaret Carter, nothing mattered more than career, status, and appearances. Miles had once spoken that language fluently, but now found it foreign. "You're throwing away everything we built," Margaret finally said, voice cold with disappointment. "No, Mother. I'm building something different." After 2 weeks, Miles found the perfect place, a small house with 2 bedrooms and a backyard, in a safe but not showy neighborhood. Simple but comfortable furniture, freshly painted walls, well-sealed windows. Nothing fancy, just dignified. Exactly what Rachel deserved. Exactly what Ellie deserved. He signed a 1-year lease with an option to buy not wanting it to feel like charity, but rather a genuine commitment. The following Saturday, after taking Ellie to the park, Miles asked to speak privately with Rachel. The little girl went to play in the small front yard of the makeshift home, leaving them a moment alone. "You seem tense," Rachel noted, sitting in the only intact chair in the place. "Something happened." Miles inhaled deeply, choosing his words carefully. "Rachel, I've been thinking a lot these past few weeks. About Ellie, about you, about the way you two live." She instantly bristled, shoulders squared. "We're doing the best we can. Not everyone has the privilege of—" "I know, and I'm not judging you," Miles cut in. "Actually, I think it's amazing how you've managed everything. Raising Ellie by yourself all these years." Rachel relaxed slightly, though her eyes still held caution. "But every time I leave, I can't stop thinking about how it leaks here when it rains, or how Ellie doesn't have her own room, how you work 2 jobs and still barely make enough for food." "We're surviving," Rachel said, though less firmly now. Miles glanced around at the cracked walls, the bucket placed to catch drips, the exposed wiring that was a constant danger. "No one should have to live like this," he said, voice gentle but determined. "You both deserve better. Let me help. Not to save you, but to fix what I broke." Rachel crossed her arms, a gesture he recalled from college whenever she felt vulnerable. "You didn't break anything alone. It takes 2 to dance. Even so, Ellie shouldn't have to pay the price for our mistakes." At that moment, as if summoned by hearing her name, Ellie came to the door, still hugging the teddy bear Miles had given her. "What are you talking about?" she asked, curious. Miles looked at Rachel, letting her decide how to answer. After a brief hesitation, she waved Ellie over. Miles wants to help us get a better place, she explained, speaking carefully. Ellie's eyes grew wide. With windows that close and no leaks. The simplicity of the child's wish, just functional windows, caused Rachel's guarded posture to drop a notch. Her gaze met Miles's, and for the first time since their reunion, it wasn't purely resistant but actually contemplative. "I don't want your charity," she said quietly. "It's not charity, Rachel. It's responsibility." Ellie, sensing her mother's hesitation, walked over to Miles and took his hand, a gesture so natural it was as though she'd done it all her life. "Please, Mom," she said, looking between them with the surprising intuition she sometimes had. "Can we go?" Rachel watched her daughter for a long moment, then, with a sigh that carried the weight of years of solitary struggle, she slowly nodded. "Not for you," she told Miles, though without real hostility. "For her. That's all I ask," he replied softly. 3 days later, Rachel and Ellie saw the house for the first time. Miles stayed back intentionally, letting them explore on their own. When he finally followed them inside, Ellie was sprinting from room to room, squealing with delight. "Mom, there's a real bathtub and closets. And look, a real bed." Rachel stood in the middle of the living room, looking around with an expression that was hard to read, a mixture of reluctant gratitude and wounded pride. "It's more than I expected," she said when she saw Miles. "It's the bare minimum," he replied, holding out a set of keys. "They're yours." "No conditions, no strings." Rachel hesitated before taking them. "But how will we pay for it?" "You won't. I've already taken care of the payments." "Miles, I can't just accept." "You can, and you will," he interrupted gently. "Not as charity, but as a right. Ellie's right to have a safe home, and your right not to have to choose between rent and food." Rachel stared at the keys in her hand, then at Ellie, who was already deciding which corner of her new room to keep her few toys in. "I still don't fully trust you," she admitted quietly. "I know I don't expect you to, not yet. But maybe someday." Over the next week, Miles helped them move, not that they had many possessions to carry. A few clothes, some kitchen items, Ellie's drawings, Rachel's worn books, a whole life that fit into a handful of boxes. Once they settled in, Miles left a small stack of new children's books on a shelf in Ellie's room, carefully chosen based on stories she'd said she liked. For Rachel, he left a simple vase of daisies on the kitchen table, the same flowers she used to pick around their old college campus. In the weeks that followed, Miles gave them space, visiting only when invited, usually to see Ellie. The girl thrived in the new environment. She slept better, ate better, smiled more often. One Sunday afternoon, while Miles sat on a small bench in the backyard, Ellie was playing with a new stuffed dog in the freshly cut grass. She invented elaborate stories, giving different voices to each imaginary character. Rachel walked out of the house carrying lemonade on a tray, looking more relaxed than usual. "She's different," Rachel said, sitting at a safe distance from Miles. "More like a child." Miles nodded, understanding. Ellie seemed free at last to just be a 4-year-old, without the burden of worries too big for her age. "The shower is dripping," Rachel said after a brief silence. "I tried to tighten it, but I think it needs a wrench." "I can take a look," Miles offered, being careful not to sound condescending. In the small kitchen, Miles worked on the faucet while Rachel prepared lunch. The silence, and once tense, was more comfortable now. "Remember that time we tried to fix your apartment heater in college?" Rachel asked suddenly, smiling a little. Miles laughed at the vivid memory. "And we ended up flooding the entire hallway. The superintendent was close to kicking us out. You tried to tell him it was a controlled scientific experiment. It worked, didn't it? Only because you offered to pay for the repairs." They both laughed, and for a moment, It was as though the intervening years and hurts never existed, just Rachel and Miles again, sharing an inside joke. Ellie, drawn by the laughter, ran in, seeing them together. She beamed with a joy Miles had never seen. She sprinted into his arms, as if that were the most normal thing in the world. "Dad, come see what I built in the yard." The word Dad slipped out so naturally that neither adult commented on it, though Miles noticed Rachel tense up momentarily. As Ellie dragged him out, Rachel stayed in the kitchen, clearly wrestling with mixed emotions. That domestic scene, her and Miles chatting, Ellie calling him Dad, was something she'd once imagined, long before everything fell apart. Later, as Miles was leaving, the doorbell rang. A tall man with a kind yet stern expression stood there, carrying grocery bags. "Jordan," Rachel greeted, looking briefly uncomfortable. "I didn't know you were coming today." "I wanted to see how the move was going," Jordan replied, eyes flicking toward Miles with distrust. "I brought some of those things you said you needed." "Thanks, that's really thoughtful." Rachel introduced them briefly. "Jordan, this is Miles." "Miles, Jordan, he's a friend from the diner." The two men shook hands stiffly. Miles sensed Jordan's protective stance toward Rachel and Ellie, and he respected it. After all, Jordan had been around while Miles hadn't. "I was just leaving," Miles said, understanding the hint. "I'll see you next weekend, Ellie." The girl ran for a quick hug, still surprising him every time. "Bye, Dad. Come back soon." Driving off, Miles spotted Jordan entering the house with the groceries, Rachel closing the door behind him. He felt a pang, not exactly jealousy, but a reminder of what he'd missed, those everyday, ordinary moments he'd never experienced with them. Yet there was also a new feeling within him, not hollow regret, but a sense of purpose. For the first time, his actions aligned with deeper values, not someone else's expectations. The bridge between the past and an uncertain future was being built slowly, each small shared moment a plank carefully laid across the gulf that had separated them. Miles knew it would be a long process without guarantees, but for the first time in years, he felt he was on the right path. Not the path his mother had drawn, nor the one he had envisioned for himself, but a path of genuine transformation built on truer choices. Autumn arrived, bringing cooler afternoons and golden leaves that began to cover the small backyard. Almost 2 months had passed since the move, and a quiet routine had taken shape. Miles visited on weekends, sometimes during the week, always maintaining a respectful distance that Rachel seemed to appreciate. On that Sunday, the sun shone with that particular autumn glow, softer, more golden, as though preparing the world for shorter days. Ellie was a few yards away, constructing an imaginary town with rocks, sticks, and fallen leaves. Rachel and Miles sat on the back steps, drinking coffee. The silence between them no longer felt loaded with tension, but had become something almost familiar. "She seems happier here," Miles remarked, watching Ellie explain something to her teddy bear about the leaf castle. Rachel nodded. "She sleeps through the night now. No nightmares about drips or strange noises." "And you?" Miles asked gently. "Are you happier?" Rachel pondered the question, looking into her coffee cup as if searching for the right words. "I'm calmer," she finally said. "It's different not worrying about whether we'll have enough to eat or if the roof will survive the next storm." They fell silent again, watching Ellie play. It was strange how, after so many years apart, they could share these moments, still not entirely comfortable but peaceful. "Jordan hasn't been around much," Miles commented casually. Rachel offered a faint smile. "He thinks I'm making a mistake, letting you back into our lives like this. Do you think it's a mistake?" Rachel turned to look at him directly. "I haven't decided yet." No text in the original. Paragraph intentionally skipped to preserve numbering. "Rachel," he began, his throat dry, voice shakier than intended. "Why didn't you ever tell me for sure? I need to know, is Ellie my daughter?" Time froze between them. Rachel didn't avert her gaze, but something changed in her eyes, like an important decision was being formed right then. Without speaking, she stood and went inside. Miles remained where he was, afraid he'd crossed a line and ruined the fragile peace they'd built in recent weeks. Ellie glanced his way, then returned to her leaf construction, lost in her own world. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, Rachel returned. She carried a small, worn wooden box, setting it between them on the steps. "I kept this all these years," she said, her voice low but steady. "Even when we moved from one place to another, barely had food, I never could throw it out." Carefully, she lifted the lid. Inside were several envelopes, folded papers, and small objects. A faint scent of old paper and faded perfume escaped, echoing the past. Rachel began taking items out, one by one. First, a bundle of letters, all addressed to him, dated 5 years earlier. "Copies of the letters I sent," she explained, running her fingertips over his name in her handwriting. "I made copies because something told me you'd never get them." Then a small brown envelope. She pulled out a black and white grainy image, an ultrasound. 12 weeks, Rachel said, brushing her finger across the picture. "That's when I knew she was a girl." Finally, a photograph. Miles and Rachel standing by the campus lake, arms around each other, smiling without a care. On the back, a date and a simple handwritten phrase, "Always us." "I tried. Many times," Rachel said, voice trembling with pent-up emotion. "But your mother did everything to keep me away. She said you'd changed, that you didn't want me anymore, that you'd forget me soon. Then, I was gone from your life." Miles stared at the items, the weight of the truth crashing down. The proof was right there. Ellie was indeed his daughter. Margaret had known all along, choosing pride and control over honesty. "Why did you keep all this?" he asked, barely louder than a whisper. Rachel picked up the photo again, studying it before replying. "At first, it was hope," she admitted. "Then, it became a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Rachel lifted her gaze, eyes wet but no tears falling. "That not everything we love can be kept." Miles felt as if he'd been punched. The evidence before him spoke of a greater betrayal than he'd imagined, not just by his mother, but by himself for being so easily swayed, not fighting for Rachel. "She didn't want a girl like me near your family's name," Rachel went on, voice barely a whisper. "But Ellie was never a mistake. Never." Miles watched Ellie, fully absorbed in her leafy fortress a few feet away. How could he have missed it? The same eyes, the same chin, the same expressions. Part of him had likely known it from the very first moment he saw her. It was devastating. Miles felt everything inside him crumble. His image of his mother, the years lost to the love left behind. His entire life built on illusions now collapsed. He stood abruptly, needing to move to process this avalanche of revelations. He walked around the tiny yard, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot sounding like an echo of wasted years. He took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, trying to steady the turmoil within. Anger, sadness, guilt, regret. Suddenly, a child's laugh pierced the air. Miles turned to see Ellie chasing a bright red leaf the wind had picked up, her face glowing with innocent delight. It was like a lighthouse in a storm. She was there, his daughter. Despite all the lies and failures, she was here, and so was he. It wasn't too late. When he faced Rachel again, still on the steps, his expression had transformed, new resolve, a clarity that hadn't been there before. "So now I know," he said, voice firm despite the swirl of emotions. "And I'm never leaving you again." Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence was thick but no longer uncertain. The truth was finally in the open. Ellie, sensing a shift, looked toward them. Seeing both adults watching her, she flashed a smile so genuine and full of trust that for an instant it lifted the heaviness of the past. "Dad, look," she called, holding up an especially large, red leaf. "It's shaped like a star." "It's beautiful," Miles replied, voice steadier. Let's press it between book pages so we can keep it. Like a memory, Ellie asked, eyes wide. Exactly, he said, glancing at Rachel. Like a memory. Rachel met his gaze, and for the briefest moment, Miles saw not just the mother of his child, but the woman he once loved. The same woman still there beneath layers of hurt. The truth, painful as it was, had been spoken. Perhaps now they could begin rebuilding on a foundation of honesty rather than secrets. The next morning after that revelation dawned clear. Miles had spent the night in the guest room. He hadn't felt able to drive after such a day. He'd barely slept, wrestling with the letters never received, the lost years, his mother's deceit, and above all, the irrevocable fact Ellie was his daughter and always had been. When the first rays of sunlight came through the window, Miles was already awake. He heard movement in the kitchen, Rachel making coffee, most likely, and a soft children's tune from the living room. He got up, washed his face, and straightened his clothes. He wanted to look decent, not out of vanity, but out of respect for the new beginning they'd reached. He walked quietly down the hallway and stopped at the doorway to the living room. Ellie sat on a circular rug, crayons scattered around her like a rainbow on the floor. She was intently drawing on a large piece of paper, tongue sticking out in concentration, an expression that reminded Miles of himself. He paused to watch. His daughter. The concept still felt vast, a reality that no longer was just a possibility. It was established, supported by letters, ultrasound photos, and Rachel's confession. Slowly, he approached and sat on the rug beside her. Ellie glanced at him, smiled, and returned to her drawing, not at all surprised to see him there so early. Already, his presence was normal to her. "What are you drawing?" he asked, leaning closer. Ellie held up the paper. "A house with Mom, me, and you, but you have a really big smile now." Miles looked at the three stick figures, one tall with dark hair, one medium with brown hair, and one small in a red dress, all held hands in front of a bright, colorful house. The figure representing him had an enormous, lopsided grin. "Why is my smile so big?" he asked, genuinely curious. "'Cause now you know you're really my dad," Ellie answered, with childlike certainty. "And that makes people happy. Mom said so." Miles's heart clenched. How could a 4-year-old grasp so clearly something that was still so new to him? He realized Ellie had always known, at least in her own way. "It's a nice house," he commented, throat tight. "Can I help?" Ellie nodded, handing him a blue crayon. "You can draw the sky, big, with clouds." Miles smiled and began to color the top portion of the page, slow and deliberate, as though handling something precious. Because it was. A simple moment between a father and daughter he never knew he had. For a few minutes, they colored in a companionable silence. From the corner of his eye, Miles noticed Rachel in the kitchen doorway, watching with an unreadable expression, no longer the hardened distrust, but something more tentative. After a time, Miles set his crayon down, determined to speak what was in his heart. Rachel had shared her truths last night. Now it was his turn. "Ellie," he began softly, "can I tell you something?" She looked up from the drawing, wide-eyed, and nodded. "I didn't know you were my daughter," he said, choosing his words carefully. "No one told me. Because of that, I missed a lot of moments with you." Ellie kept quiet, green eyes like his fixed on him, absorbing every word without interruption. It was disconcerting how she could be so small, yet so perceptive. "I didn't see you being born," he continued more steadily. "I didn't hold you as a baby or see your first steps. I wasn't there when you got sick or when you were scared of storms." Miles swallowed hard, feeling a tightness in his throat. It was more difficult than he'd anticipated, admitting these failures to a child, even though they weren't entirely his fault. "I'm sorry I wasn't here before. If I could go back in time, I would have looked for you, held you, brought you home." He paused, ensuring she understood. "But now that I know, I want to be here every day. If that's okay with you." Ellie was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, to his astonishment, she leaned her head against his shoulder and said, "You're already here. And I like it when you call me little one." The simple acceptance in her words slammed into Miles with immense force. He couldn't speak, tears threatening, so he just gently squeezed her small hand. Right then, with Ellie's head on his shoulder, Miles realized he was really being called Dad. Not just by biology, but by love. A love that had been waiting for him to show up. From across the living room, Rachel observed, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup as if for support. Her eyes shimmered, but she wore a small smile. She, too, was learning that starting over didn't mean denying the past, but accepting it, truths and all, and forging on. 3 months passed. Autumn yielded to winter, and winter was now loosening its grip. Tiny green buds had started to appear on the trees, promising a spring that Miles could share with Ellie and Rachel this time. Life found a new rhythm. Miles rented an apartment just 10 minutes from Rachel's house, close enough to visit daily, but with enough distance to respect the space she still needed. He cut back on his hours at work, delegating tasks he once considered non-negotiable. His priorities had changed, just like that. Every morning before work, he stopped by to have breakfast with Rachel and Ellie. On weekends, they spent the whole day together, at the park, the movies, or simply at the house doing everyday family things. Gradually, Miles became part of the routine, lazy Sunday mornings, lunches in the backyard. Rachel, initially guarded, gradually let her defenses down. It wasn't love, not yet, and maybe never. But there was a new camaraderie between them, a mutual respect built on long-hidden truths and acceptance of the past. One almost spring afternoon, Miles was in his office reviewing contracts when his assistant announced, "Your mother is here, Mr. Carter. She insists on seeing you." Miles felt his stomach drop. Since discovering the truth about Ellie, he'd ignored Margaret's calls, unable to confront her without anger taking over. But time had turned that fury into something colder and more measured. "Send her in," he said, sitting up straight. Margaret Carter entered, impeccably dressed, but with a subtle difference. A hint of fragility Miles had never seen. Her eyes, usually calculating, looked tired, almost regretful. "Miles," she began, her voice lacking its normal confidence. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "What do you want, Mother?" he asked bluntly. Margaret didn't sit. She stood by the chair, gripping the handle of her luxury purse, clearly ill at ease. "I want to ask your forgiveness," she said, as though the words were foreign. "I know what I did is unforgivable. Hiding your daughter from you, there's no excuse." Miles studied her, half expecting some manipulative angle, but for the first time, he saw only a woman weighed down by her own choices. "Why now?" he asked. "After all this time?" Margaret turned to look at the window before answering. "I've been thinking about legacies, Miles, about what we truly leave behind. I built a life of material success, but," she paused, "in the end, relationships matter most, and I've destroyed the ones that count." She hesitated, taking a breath. "I'd like to meet my granddaughter. Undo some of the damage, if that's even possible. If you'll allow me." Miles was quiet, absorbing it. Part of him wanted to deny her, to make her pay for the stolen years. Another part, maybe the part awakened by Ellie, saw beyond the rage. "It's not just my call," he said eventually. "I'll talk to Rachel and Ellie too." "I understand," Margaret said, a slight smile of gratitude curling her lips. "That's more than I deserve." A few days later, after long talks with Rachel, who, surprisingly, was open to the idea, Margaret arrived at their home. She carried a large box of carefully chosen children's books and this on top, a homemade strawberry cake. Miles waited on the porch with Ellie by his side. The girl watched the newcomer with curiosity, clinging slightly to her father's leg. "Who's she, Dad?" Ellie asked in a low voice. Miles lifted her into his arms, comforted by his daughter's small weight, and spoke gently. "She's your grandmother." She came to meet you. Standing in the doorway, Rachel watched, her expression layered with tension and a glimmer of hope. She had allowed this visit not for Margaret, but for Ellie, to give the girl the chance of a complete family, something Rachel herself had never known. Margaret approached cautiously, as if scared to startle a wild animal. When she finally got close to Ellie, she surprised everyone by kneeling down, letting her expensive suit touch the ground. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," Margaret said, her voice uncommonly gentle. "I brought a cake. Do you like strawberry?" Ellie studied the older woman's face for a moment, then looked at Rachel, as if seeking approval. Rachel gave a tiny nod, small but loaded with meaning. "I do like it," Ellie finally answered, a shy smile forming. "And I like books too." "How perfect," Margaret said, indicating the box she carried. "I brought some I think you'll enjoy." It was a beginning, small and fragile, but still a beginning. And in that simple gesture of a grandmother meeting her granddaughter for the first time, the circle began to close. 14 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, the four of them were gathered in the backyard. Ellie sat on Miles's lap, Rachel next to them on a simple garden chair, and Margaret reading a story about a little girl traveling among the stars. It was a scene none of them could have imagined just months ago, so unlikely, it almost felt impossible. Yet here they were, forging new bonds atop the ruins of old ones. The lost time couldn't be recovered. Miles knew that. Ellie's first steps, first words, all the early milestones would never come back. But the future was still open, still unwritten, and it could be shaped with presence, love, and above all, truth. "One more story, Grandma," Ellie begged when Margaret closed the book. "It's getting late, sweetheart," Miles said gently, noticing the setting sun. "Just one more, Dad," Ellie pleaded, using those eyes he was quickly learning to be powerless against. Rachel laughed softly, sharing a knowing glance with Miles, the kind of silent communication only parents truly master. "I guess we can make an exception tonight," she relented. A fresh start wasn't a miraculous change, Miles had learned. It was a choice all of them made daily. They chose to forgive, chose to trust, chose to rebuild, step by step, moment by moment. Spring arrived in full bloom. One particularly lovely morning, Miles, Rachel, and Ellie walked together to the little school. Ellie walked in the middle, holding both their hands and occasionally hopping over the sidewalk cracks as if they were obstacles in an epic quest. Rachel wore a light dress, her hair free in the mild wind. Over the past few months, something between them had shifted. Their initial camaraderie deepened. Their late-night conversations after Ellie went to bed lasted longer. Shared laughter became more frequent. "So, have you decided?" Ellie asked out of nowhere, interrupting their peaceful silence. "Decided what, little one?" Miles asked. "Whether you're going to live together," she said, sounding exasperated at repeating the obvious. "You said you'd think about it." Miles and Rachel exchanged a glance over Ellie's head. It was an issue they'd been discussing slowly, carefully, not wanting to rush. A step neither wanted to take lightly, yet one that felt increasingly natural. "We're still talking," Rachel answered softly. Then, to Miles's surprise, she reached out and took his hand, fingers lacing gently with his. Ellie noticed and smiled, apparently satisfied. "That way, we can all eat together. Right, Dad?" Miles squeezed Rachel's hand, his heart full. In that small gesture lay the entire journey they'd traveled, from lies to truth, distrust to acceptance, the past to a new present they were building. "Yes, my love," he told Ellie, "now and always." The lost time was finally discovering a new rhythm, a quiet restart and yet one brimming with life. And Miles understood that small actions, a name spoken at the right time, a hand extended in reconciliation, a long-hidden truth revealed, could transform an entire life. This story wasn't about perfection, but about having the courage to begin again. about the strength of a woman who safeguarded her daughter with dignity against all odds, about the power of a man who, confronted with the truth, chose love over pride, and about a little girl who, without knowing it, taught them the most essential lesson of all, that true love, when real, always finds its way back home. The end of winter didn't just bring flowers, it brought hope. Hope that the future could be different, that each of them might find redemption in the simple daily act of being present. Miles no longer started his mornings with numbers and spreadsheets alone. He now looked forward to a giggling 4-year-old and a cup of coffee shared with a woman whose eyes had once completely captured him. Sometimes, late at night, he'd stare at the ceiling, recalling the swirl of events that had brought them here. A child appearing unexpectedly in the Belmont restaurant, the frantic search through city streets, the confrontation with his mother. It all felt like another lifetime. In that sense, maybe it was. The Miles who lived exclusively for deals and status seemed like a ghost, a person he no longer recognized. Rachel, for her part, still carried hurts that wouldn't vanish overnight. She told him more than once that trust was like a delicate plant, needing careful tending, but at least now she gave him that chance. Ellie remained the shining thread that bound them. Every day she greeted Miles with fresh excitement, as though she half expected him not to show up, yet rejoiced when he did. Over time, that lingering doubt softened into something steadier. One afternoon, after picking Ellie up from school, they passed by a bookstore, and Miles decided to go in. He let Ellie choose any book she liked. She picked a beginner's reading primer filled with bright pictures and short sentences. The grin on her face was worth more than any paycheck he'd ever earned. They read together that night, Ellie on his lap, Rachel sitting beside them. The three of them sounded out letters and words, Ellie's finger tracing each one. Every time she grasped a new word, her eyes lit up. Every time she stumbled, Rachel gently corrected her the way a teacher might. "You're doing great," Miles whispered to Ellie, as if afraid of breaking the spell. "I'm so proud of you." Ellie beamed as though she'd just conquered a kingdom. Rachel gave Miles a long, thoughtful look he couldn't quite interpret. Gratitude, perhaps, or something more. The days blended into a soft rhythm of shared moments. Saturday afternoons at the park, Sunday lunches on the back porch. Miles became a fixture in their everyday routines, no longer a visitor. The thought of returning to his old life felt alien, a relic from a person he used to be. At work, Greg noticed a change in Miles's attitude. He wasn't the same relentless negotiator. He delegated deals he used to handle himself. He'd excuse himself early to pick Ellie up or meet Rachel for dinner. Some partners thought he was losing his edge. But Miles realized he didn't care about that edge as much as before. The drive that once propelled him toward bigger checks and grander titles seemed hollow compared to watching Ellie laugh over a simple, silly joke. The day he placed his resignation letter on Greg's desk felt both terrifying and liberating. He wasn't giving up business altogether, but he needed something that aligned with his new sense of purpose. Maybe a consultancy, maybe a smaller firm. He wasn't sure. He only knew he wanted to be present for his daughter's life in a way he'd never been for anything else. Margaret's presence also shifted. Though she'd started coming around to see Ellie, the old manipulative side of her had softened, or perhaps it had been stripped away by guilt and regret. She'd bring small gifts or show up with groceries, unsure how to fix past wrongs but trying anyway. Rachel still treated her with a polite distance, protective of Ellie's well-being. She recalled all too well the cruelty that had separated her from Miles years earlier. But for Ellie's sake, Rachel allowed room for a sort of tentative peace. On one visit, Margaret shyly asked Ellie if she'd like piano lessons. When the girl responded with wide-eyed excitement, Rachel nodded her approval. It was a tiny step, but an important one for a grandmother who finally understood she had something to give. Besides disapproval and control, the day Miles took Rachel and Ellie to see a small cottage for sale at the city's outskirts felt like a milestone. The house was modest, with a cozy living room, 2 bedrooms and a little garden. but it had a sturdy roof and large windows that let in the morning sun. Ellie raced around each room, already imagining where to put her drawings and books. Rachel walked quietly, running her fingers along walls freshly painted in warm colors. Miles watched them both, his heart feeling more at home there than in any penthouse. Standing by the kitchen window, Rachel folded her arms and gazed outside. The property backed up against a small wooded area, its leaves just budding with new life. She seemed lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" Miles asked softly. Rachel turned to him. "It's more than I ever expected." She paused, inhaling the scent of fresh paint. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure about starting a life together," Miles said, his voice steady. "With you and Ellie. No more secrets, no more missed years." Rachel's eyes shone with unshed tears. She gave a trembling nod. "Then I guess it's time to begin." Ellie's voice echoed from the next room. "Mom, Dad, look, there's a closet just my size." They exchanged a smile, the word Dad still sending a warm jolt through Miles. They followed Ellie, listening to her chatter about decorations and bedtime stories under a real, leak-free roof. A month later, after a maze of paperwork and a few last repairs, the house was theirs. Miles spent nights painting walls and sanding floors, with Rachel by his side. Sometimes Ellie helped too, leaving little palm prints in corners that would become cherished memories. On moving day, Jordan showed up, offering to carry boxes. He and Miles shared a brief, friendly handshake. No tension this time, just an understanding that they both cared for Rachel and Ellie in different ways. Margaret also arrived with prepared meals. It was a strange gathering of people once divided by lies and misconceptions, now united, if awkwardly, in the shared goal of giving Ellie a true home. When all was done, the house was still sparse, but it felt warm, alive. Rachel placed fresh flowers on the kitchen table. Ellie eagerly tacked up her drawings on her new bedroom wall. Miles, exhausted but content, leaned against the doorframe, watching his daughter in a room that was finally her own. "Dad, can I put my star poster here?" Ellie asked, pointing to a spot above the bed. "Sure, little one," he replied, helping her pin it carefully. "Right there. Perfect." That night, for the first time, they all sat down at the little dining table, sharing a meal in a place that belonged to them, a place that reflected not wealth or expectations, but honesty and love. After dinner, Ellie curled up on the couch with her worn teddy bear, the new puppy plush, and a mound of blankets. Rachel sat beside her, humming that familiar lullaby about a girl who counted stars until sleep claimed her. Miles joined in quietly, his deeper voice blending with Rachel's softer tone. Ellie's eyes fluttered as sleep approached. In that simple, unremarkable domestic moment, Miles felt a profound sense of belonging he'd never experienced, even in his mother's opulent mansion or his own penthouse. He gently picked Ellie up, carried her to her new bed, and tucked her in. She stirred slightly, murmuring, "Dad, I love you." "I love you too," he whispered, kissing her forehead. He stood there a moment, watching her breathe, overwhelmed by gratitude and a fierce desire to protect this little life. Rachel waited in the hallway, arms folded around herself as if uncertain. Miles approached her, feeling the tension of unspoken words between them. "I never stopped loving you," he said quietly. She stopped him with a gentle hand on his chest. "It's okay. Maybe we both made mistakes. Maybe we can start over too." Her voice wavered, but the resolve in her eyes was clear. "I'd like that," Miles replied, covering her hand with his own. They stood there, the hallway light faintly illuminating them. Beyond the door, Ellie slept peacefully in her new room, a testament to how life could change if people dared let truth and love guide them. In the following days, Margaret visited, bringing housewarming gifts, a small piano for Ellie's lessons, curtains that matched the living room's warm palette. There were awkward moments, old wounds too deep to vanish completely. But there was also acceptance and the cautious forging of a new family dynamic. Jordan occasionally dropped by as well, usually with groceries or to fix something around the house. He teased Miles about city boy hands that weren't used to manual labor, and Miles teased back with a grin. The unspoken rivalry had softened into mutual respect. Each day the house felt more like home. The walls bore laughter. The porch witnessed quiet conversations. The tiny garden grew green and inviting. Ellie thrived, bounding around with bright eyes and unstoppable energy. On a cool spring evening, they gathered in the yard, looking at the stars. Ellie insisted on spotting constellations she'd learned about at school. Rachel hummed the lullaby under her breath. Miles wrapped an arm around Rachel's shoulders, feeling her lean into him. Margaret sipped tea nearby, content to simply observe, and Jordan stood off to the side, a quiet friend who had been there for them in darker days. This was no fairy tale ending. There were arguments over finances, differences of opinion, baggage from the past. There were regrets for lost years, and sometimes Miles caught a distant sadness in Rachel's eyes, remembering all she'd endured alone. But there was also the undeniable fact that they were facing the future together. Ellie was happy, Rachel was slowly healing. Miles was discovering a better version of himself. Even Margaret was learning that real legacy isn't about orchestrating someone else's life, but about showing up with honesty and humility. One night, Ellie told Miles she wanted to change the question mark she used to draw on the dad figure. She found an old drawing and, with crayons, replaced the with a tiny smiling face that resembled Miles's. She drew them all holding hands, her, Rachel, Miles, and left a space for Margaret's too. Miles kept that drawing pinned on the fridge, a reminder that love could be a choice made over and over, that it was never too late to rewrite part of your story, even if you couldn't erase what came before. Sometimes, when Miles walked through that cozy house, a house that echoed with laughter instead of hollow silence, he would pause, feeling gratitude so intense it nearly hurt. This was what had been missing. Real connection, real purpose, real life. And it had been there all along, waiting for him to find the courage to claim it. Because in the end, there is no greater wealth than the love that says, "We're here. We belong to each other." The love that sees a hungry child in a fancy restaurant and declares, "I'll never let you walk alone again." The love that sees past mistakes, betrayal and manipulation, choosing to rebuild anyway. And above all, the love that finds its way back home, always,